So let me start with managing your gray values. Let me see. It's so hard to choose which one to start with. Alright, let's start with this one. Hands are made of skin, and the grayscale of skin tones sits around the midtones. It does not come in dark. It does not come in highlighted. When we're talking about objects that are reflective, that have a high specular margin, such as water or glass, or any reflective material, they have a high specular measure, meaning they can be very, very bright. You can use these levels of brightness on them, especially if it's a light source, if it's a flame. However, when we're talking about objects that have a texture to them, and we're talking about microtexture and macro texture, and what we see is large textures such as grass or rocks, a rocky field, or pebbles, a pebbly road, or skin, or scales. These are all microtextures. What they do, not really scales because they have a reflectivity to them, something scale-like in texture only. They have a non-smooth surface, so they have a mattified, a level of matte to them, matte, and they do not reach the high no man's land values. So whenever you paint skin, you're painting basically the same exact values that you've used for the skin of the face. You use the same skin on the hands. Because some of you don't get an immediate read on the hands, you guys settle for high contrast too soon. You guys go for the high contrast way before you have to. And what that results in, it results in a son of a bitch. Seriously. Massachusetts? What the fuck? Fucking telemarketing sons of bitches. What was I saying? What the heck was I saying? Grayscale, you guys settled for the same grayscales for the face, and let's just start over. So I'm going to put these side by side, and we're going to explore a little bit the mistakes you made in just the structural part of it. Forget that it's a hand. I fucking forgot what I was saying. Just structurally, treating this as a form study. And as you know, every object you're ever going to draw at one point was a form study. At least in your understanding, it should have been. Meaning that there is an inherent geometric pattern beneath all shapes. And if you find that geometric pattern, the form study version, the low polygon, low poly version of that object, it'll be much easier for you to know what to do with your large brush when your brush is largest. And the first mistake that you made in your structural sort of anatomy here is that you, son of a bitch, I'm so sorry, you went way too high contrast too soon. So what we have to do to change that is darken, completely darken these shades here. In your reference photo, the background is a mid-tone, which is what I usually say. Usually all backgrounds have this level of gray to them, generally speaking. Light coming from top down creates these kinds of values on the interior of the space that holds the object in it. The three-dimensional space that the object is in. The room, and then the object in the room. Where you had your values before was way outside. You had your values in a purposefully lit room, in a room that you see used for fashion photography. Those really white rooms that try to create as much contrast as possible so they can show off fabrics or textures. What we're trying to do is we're trying to show off the texture and the structure and the form of a mattified skin covered object, which is the hand, meaning that the background has technically be a bit more medium tone, and the object itself, since seeing that it's not completely illuminated, not completely white, meaning the light was at a distance from the object. So if the light is at a distance from the object, the rule goes, if the closer you get to the light, source, the higher the contrast you will have. The further away from the light source, the less contrast, because there will be less intensity, causing less intense shadows. So please remember, I'm going to apply this change to all of these here. And a lot of you, not this one, a lot of you are using too much contrast too soon. comparing to what the contrast potential is, even for the fact that it's hands. This is an overexposed photo. You can follow what this photo is saying. It might not even be overexposed. It can just be really, really piercing light, a lamp nearby, or severe sunlight shining into a dark, dark room. This could be one reason why this is so overexposed. But you see the midtones themselves are all medium gray. They're all really, really good grays. So don't go too high too soon. And don't go too low too soon, and doing that simultaneously is using too much contrast, and you're settling for the contrast so it can give you a better read. And that's not good. That's never a good deal. What next I'm going to do is I'm going to get the lighten layer. I used the darken layer to bring down all the lights, and I'm going to use a lighten layer to bring up all the darks. And that's going to give us that appropriate level of contrast needed for this hand. So the grays here are very, very, very subtle. So please don't forget about this. A great deal of anatomy goes into hands, yes, and that's what your reference photo guides you for. But if you guys do not know how to structure something, how to make something look like it is sculpted in an open space, no amount of anatomy is going to make it easier for you to redraw that hand. You have to have an eye for, what am I doing? You have to have an eye for that kind of structure, basically the form signature of that object, where they lie. And that's the stuff I was talking about last time: landmarks, anatomical landmarks, and structural landmarks. Important things that you need to get when your brush is largest. And we'll show you the before and after. The wrist you drew was a little like it was a little wide. That's not how it looks in the reference. Beautiful capture of the gesture though. Very good job with that. A little bit of focus down here, excessive detail. Your secondary light source shade should not be as bright. Look at this. This is primary light source, this is secondary light source. All fingers have primary and secondary light source on them. They're just moist enough and reflective and smooth enough to reflect it back. The specular is not that high, but they still do it. So primary light source, secondary light source, it is not as bright. So that's one of the mistakes you had here. Okay. Right here and right here, there isn't enough contrast in this environment, in the room, to represent the severity of this depression here. But you expressed it as if it was that intense a severity, that intense a depression. So what you need to do is soften that up with a large brush and lower opacity or lighter pen pressure. You need to represent that. I'm going to use soft brush. That'll give me that skin texture. Okay. And then most importantly, the background is a bit too light all around for the amount of shadows this room is capable of. No. I don't think this is doable. So remember, it's just as important to capture the actual color of the light source in the environment, in the walls. It affects the colors that we see in the object. And then finally are the edges of the object. So we have to see exactly how these lights taper off. And it's a pretty common gradient. And this is the z-axis line. Do you see it? That we talked about last time. This is the point where the finger, instead of becoming a sausage, becomes a cube. And we see it here. We see it just along this side here. And this is what you're trying to capture with your brushes, but I don't see much of it here, because what I want to see is the point where it really becomes an edge. And what I'm going to do is try to represent that edge as much as possible by creating a really sharp edge at the very tip. And this kind of edge. It doesn't translate perfectly down. It kind of comes to a point near the tips of the fingers. So that's what you want to capture as well. The tips of the fingers are very different from the rest of the finger because the bones are smaller, there's less fat, and the nails are there. So everything kind of shrinks to accommodate to the fact that you might pick up something small with these fingers. So you have to shrink your brush, of course, and work with a much higher opacity so you can represent that level of detail needed. I'm creating this sharp edge. This random dark spot here is just going to get painted away. Oopsie. And then the secondary light source, of course, will have to come in. And we would need a secondary light source for that finger. It's still a bit messy, but I have lots of hands to go through. And please don't forget about the breaks in the knuckles in the palm side. These are very important for they're anatomical landmarks. They read quickly. And they're very important for representing which part of the finger we're looking at, which part is facing up. Without these landmarks, it'll be very difficult. If all you do is draw a sausage, it'll be very difficult for us to tell which part of the hand is looking up or down if you don't make enough of a detail differentiating between knuckles and the palm side. A little bit more edge work, and then we'll look at the before and after real quick. Cleaning up these edges. One really big, I've talked about this in another class, are the depth rules, the rules of depth. Stacking, atmospheric fade, scale, blur. One big thing that one of these depth rules that happens in hands a lot is stacking. And one object in front of the other object, representing that there is an open space, and one object hides the other object behind it. This is a really strong physics to keep in mind when trying to draw hands. Because what they do is they create the feeling of an open space in which these hands are suspended. So let's take a look at how they looked before. Overexposure, a little bit symbolic in your use of where you left the blacks and the whites. Too much contrast to try to create a read. You can create a really good read with really low contrast, because you have to remember that it is a hand that you are drawing made of skin, and that's how we bring it closer to the reference. As for where to go from here, if your reference had a black sheet behind it, bring that black sheet in. Try to find references that have a perfect gray background behind them, and you can find these with Century Stock. On DeviantArt, Century Stock have like clean backgrounds behind the hands that they do, which is really useful for you guys, because you don't want to record this light situation specifically. You want to record a very general universal light situation where there are no extra objects in the back affecting the light reflecting back at us. Okay, so Century Stock, let me just Stock. They have great hand collection. Gallery, hands. Where is it? There we go. They have nice clean hand pack and hand backgrounds, and you guys can grayscale them. And I have the link right here. So if you guys want to practice some really dynamic hand gestures and dynamic hands, it's like it's a really nice body type hand. It's not too fat, it's not too skinny, and it's really good for studying. They have like so many kinds why did they make it like that? They have so many kinds that you can probably suit it to any painting you're working on. All right, so that today is about this critique. It was about contrast. So I'm going to run over the contrast issues that we have without explaining contrast again. And I'm going to jump on to the next thing, which is line dependency. If you try to recreate a hand drawing and you use a line and you're trying to render, you have to opt the line. You have to not opt. You have to omit the line. You cannot have the line in there still because the line is representing a different translation of the form. And that both frequencies, line and rendering, interrupt each other and they do not blend very well. I'm not sure why you guys are compelled to create like a halo. Please don't. Especially if I'm critiquing, because then it's going to be too much homework for me to get through. Okay. So with the line use, what I'm going to do real quick is lighten. Oops. I'm just lightening this up. And then darken. So this is how you kind of just pinpoint the exact areas causing the high contrast. And it's still not perfect, but it'll do. If you can look at the reference, you see the reference, the tricky thing about hands is that there's a lot of work to be done with edges, cleaning edges perfectly. This is how dark the fingers go. So this is your darkest shade. Excuse me. This is your darkest shade, and this is your lightest shade. And you use such a high contrast that it really wasn't working. We were seeing a very flat version of the form, and that's what lines do. But over here we're seeing of course, a three-dimensional version of the form, because it's not like hands come with outlines on them. They are very tricky to draw because you have to know exactly when to blend these shadows and when not to blend them, and which part of the cube they are representing. So if we look at this cube of the finger right here, beautiful, beautiful cube. We see the light is hovering on this part, this edge right here, because that's the angle that's facing the light on that finger. And so when we're trying to represent this in a couple of brush strokes, we have to know exactly which finger is in front of which finger, and that's the stacking that I'm talking about, which is very, very important. What happens with you guys is you don't really stack. You lay one beside the other. And I don't really see one in front of the other. I see one beside the other, where we see one in front of the other with these paintings, with these photos. Let me find the other one where I see this as well. I don't see much of stacking here, where you have a great opportunity to lay one finger in front of the other. I see a very cautious rendition of the depth needed to represent this hand. So instead of seeing a finger, let me just do lines, a finger, and then another finger, and then the ring finger, and then the pinky. Really, really cautious with your use of stacking or lack thereof. And you could have created a much greater read in this much more beautiful gesture than this one, of course, because you used the hand as an opportunity to represent some depth. And a hand is still a unit, a three-dimensional unit in an open space. So this is a lot of caution that I see with you guys. You're afraid to put one object in front of the other. You would probably, if I asked you guys to stack, you would probably use layers. You'd use one layer for this finger, one layer for this finger, one layer for this finger. Because stacking is such a difficult thing for you guys to wrap your heads around, because it's a complete opposite of lines. We are no longer talking about the outline of the object. We're talking about the inward form of the object, which is very difficult to represent with some lines, unless we just stack one line in front of the other, of course. But we're talking about the lack of use of lines, and we only have these two shades here, and we have to know when to blend them and when not to blend them. So you have used lines to avoid doing that, this awkward thing that you have to do, where you have to find the perfect opacity in the brush as one object stands in front of the other with only this shade and this shade at your disposal. That's not easy to do. You know, this is beside all the gesture and anatomy stuff. This is all structure and mechanics. And that's what I'm trying to tell you guys you have to start doing, is you have to start limiting your palette. Limiting your palette is one thing that I always tell my students who do form studies to do. They limit their palette. I do not allow them to use more than 3 shades. And I do not allow them to exit the form study. So let me do a quick one. And by using these 2 shades specifically, they have to find a common shape in all of this. These form studies prepare you for moments like this awkward placement of 2 specific shades and lots of stacking. This is what form studies prepare you for. So if you treat a hand as a form study and know exactly your restrictions, it'll be very easy for you to make peace with the fact that you can never use a line again. And hands are advanced. Hands are advanced things to draw. They are not easy to draw, for the very reason that form studies are not easy to draw, which is you have to start sculpting in your mind. You can no longer think of the symbol and the silhouette of the form of that object. A hand is the perfect test of an artist because it is the combination of anatomy knowledge, gesture and balance, taste in the exact gesture that you're choosing, and then form in all its wonders and difficulties. So from now on, when you guys do hand studies, first of all, get a good hand study pack to use, which is the Senshi stock that I recommended. Make sure it's grayscale. Do not work with color yet. You guys are still experiencing form. You guys are still studying form. And once you do get your lines down, just like we studied last time, so it was your gesture lines, and then it was your shapes, and then it was your rendering. After you guys get that basic stuff down and organizing it, remember, you have to limit yourself to 2 skin-friendly, meaning grayscales that can be transferred into skin tones. So this can be a skin tone. This can be a skin tone, because they are in the friendly gray zone area here, where it is not too white, not too saturated, not too dark, or too dark gray. And then once you get these skin-friendly textures, these skin-friendly shades, that's when you can start rendering. After you develop these initial restrictions. Remember, restrictions are not always bad. They're good for a student. Rules are good for a student because a student they can only break the rules. They can only deviate. And what we have to do as the instructor, what I have to do as the instructor, is give you guys some restrictions. One of the most important restrictions about form studies is making sure you do not have a fuzzy edge. You are misrepresenting a texture. So in this image right here, where is it? This image right here, your rendition was misrepresenting the texture. We need sharper edges. These edges here are clean. They are unforgiving. There are very specific edges here. It's bony edge, but really, really fuzzy edges here. Not very concise use of the grays, and this edge work here is very important. So when I'm talking about stacking, this finger is a singular form study. This finger is a singular form study. This one, and they're all one in front of the other, causing this feeling of depth, like you can actually walk into this room, and each of these fingers is its own pillar, and one is in front of the other, representing the z-axis as a succession into the room, into the space. So restriction is important. Everyone write that back to me. Restriction for a student is important. Rules are important. Rules are there not to be broken. No, not now. Later. None of you are ready for that. These rules are going to help you develop a good understanding of how form behaves, and making sure you're working within a lasso, or at least reminding yourself you cannot have fuzzy edges is one big massive rule. Restriction. The second restriction is making sure your grayscales are anticipating the use of color later. So later you will have to not only sculpt it and remember the anatomy and the gesture, but you have to add color. And that's another whole world you're going to have to deal with as a student. So for now, please work in grayscale and make sure that hands have to be treated with a lot of detail. And remember that hands have to be treated with a lot of detail and a lot of caution. And making sure that your grayscales are not too massively apart will help you create this beautiful read in the hand structure. So Let me see if I can go back so you guys can take a look. Okay. So right here and right here, if we were to shade these two, this is a very specific shade, and this is a very specific shade that have not blended. Now let me show you the power of blending. What happens when you guys overblend? Let's get two very, very close to each other shades. This shade, these are very random shades, okay? This shade and the slightly darker shade. I'm working with a really, really soft brush. Can you guys tell really this fucking banding from filter, noise, add noise, like 0.2. Okay. Can you guys really tell the difference between these two forms? They look like the same side of a cube, don't they? If I were to draw a cube over top, they look like the same side of a cube. They're just so similar, but they are two completely different shades. What happens next is, what's really awesome is when we have an edge that is not cleaned. If you guys ask me, okay, how do I make this hand look like this hand? This is how. You make sure this and this are not blended, because now it's no longer the one side of that cube. Now it's this. You're representing this angle and this angle. This side and this side by not blending these two shades, which is exactly what's happening between here and here. These are two different parts of the cube. This part of the cube and this part of the cube. That's how you make the hand look realistic, by completely omitting lines and by realizing that you have some serious restrictions you have to work within. And these restrictions are going to create this read, but you have to be careful about what you're blending and what you're not blending. And this is, in my opinion, what made the difference for me whenever I drew hands. Maybe I can find the old hands that I used to draw, which were really shitty and line dependent. I kind of just delete all the crap I used to draw. Let me see if I can find it. But as soon as I started realizing that maybe this is the better one, and then, sorry, I'm trying to find that really shitty hand that I drew. You can see how I avoided hands all together. Like, look at this shit. This hand, look at the line work. Look at the lines, and look at the excessive use of, ugly fucking face. Look at the excessive use of contrast for the knuckles. And look at the lines. Look at the line dependency. Over here, same hand gesture, lines, massive, I'm so embarrassed, massive contrast on the knuckles, just so I can show that landmark. Like, I understood the knuckle as a landmark, and that I needed to show the slow descent of the highlights. But that was it. Other than that, I was really messing up. I avoided hands whenever I had the chance. This is some shitty drawing. Look, I don't show hands. I was so scared of them because I didn't know how to jump really, really old stuff up here. But then when I started noticing that it was a slight variation in shade, that's kind of when my hand started to read. And this is not without a reference. I used a reference for this. And that's when the read started to happen. Way, way less contrast that I started using. A little bit of excessive line use here. So this was a while ago. This was a year ago, I think, that I drew this. I'm not really sure. Yeah, this was a year ago. But my hand started to read a lot better. So I'm not talking out of my ass here. I'm really serious. That's how you do it, is by remembering that some areas cannot be blended, because we're talking about not the large cubes. We're talking about the small, tiny, tedious little cubes that need to be represented in the fact that they are also not blending, that they also have that 90-degree angle that does not blend. Okay? So that all has to do with line work. So I know that's like an extensive way of saying stop using lines, but it's really, I cannot explain why you shouldn't use lines enough. That's a song I will be singing till I'm old. Hopefully the internet's around, then we can all grow old together. But that's a song that I'll be singing forever. And it's something that is a plague It's an epidemic. We all depend on it. It's going to be something, as long as I'm teaching, I'm going to be talking about getting rid of lines until kindergarten classes, curriculums are changed and we actually start teaching students something. But that's one big thing that you guys are facing. So where else am I seeing it? I'm seeing it here, here. I'm seeing it, of course, here. I'm seeing a little bit of it here, but this is the contrast issue from before. And I'm also seeing a kind of similar kind of edge work between the fatty part of the finger and the bony part of the finger. So this is too much contrast. I'll fix this in a second. But when I do this with my fingers, the edge of my knuckle looks nothing like the edge of the fat inside the palm, inside the finger here. What we need to see is that beautiful tucking in of the, just adjacent to the knuckle is the point where the fat tucks in, so we need to see that. And we need to behave with this, our brush behavior should change between fat and bone. And this is what I talked about last time. And as long as the finger bends in any kind of way, the bones, the skin will stretch and the bones will be revealed. And if the light is coming this way, why isn't the top of her hand getting some light too? This area here, the nails don't really start on a bulge. They can get a bulge, but they kind of taper in from the matrix of the nail. And then they can get bulgy on their way out because of like cosmetic layering of that gel. And if you really want to make it look menacing, you can just do that. And nails behave very differently between fingers. Some nails are very thick, depending on the finger they source from. So this bone structure here has to be painted with 100% opacity. And you really have to represent this sorry, I'm just reading the comments. What have I done? Yeah, so let me bring down the opacity. Darken. I usually just put it on darken layer, get my soft brush, put the opacity all the way down and just darken. Just like that. And I'm probably going to highlight this part of the palm. And then this connects into that a little bit. Probably need to zoom all the way out to get this to work. I'm just pulling out of my visual library right now, bear with me. Just the top of the thumb should get some, just the part that faces the light completely. So it would be very, very specific. Soft brush. Soft brush is very good for anything that has to do with skin. However, there are edges that cannot be blended that soft brush likes to blend. So remember that blending thing that I showed you guys, using a high opacity in between layers, in between really, really close to each other values. If you guys don't test out the sharpness to give you some form, you guys will jump straight into a darker shade. So back to this. If you guys didn't come to class today, you wouldn't have found that subtle difference in between that gray and that subtly lighter gray. So this gray and this gray, you guys would have probably said, oh shit, these grays are too close together, let me get an even darker gray, just so I can get that contrast. And hey, why not, let me just get a lighter gray, because hey, if I can get this to read even when I'm using a soft brush, then it most surely will give me lots and lots of form. This is what you guys do. This is wrong. This is absolutely wrong. Everyone repeat this back to me. Do not settle for high contrast values just because your low contrast values are not reading yet. I know that's long, but say it back. Say Istebrak anyway? Your visual library only has dust? Don't say that. I think I rely on a soft brush too much too. Yeah, that's good to recognize that. Make sure you're exploring between hard brushes because they have their purpose in the structure of form. It's like rayon, it's like a sculptor who has a chisel for the really, really important stuff, who has a shovel for the big stuff. Not a shovel, it's like a bigger tool, but who has, a much smaller, softer carving and sanding tool for the soft stuff. So there is a tool for blending, and it's going to be used when there's time to use it, when it's time to use it. But there are times when you guys have to block stuff in. And this is one of those. This GIF is what I talk about a lot. I show a lot. And this GIF is really what illustrates it beautifully. You shouldn't be worrying about this last stage. Worry only about from here to here, and that's it. Don't forget, don't worry about anything else, because you guys need to learn how to block in. See these shades of the cheeks? They are so subtle between here and here, and that edge beautifully showed that complete difference between this shade and this shade. When you blend it, it almost feels like it's a gradient that's very smooth. It's hard to detect this shade as being darker than this, and this being darker than this. But when they're polygons, it's easy. That's dark, and that's light. I want you guys to explore your polygons. I want you to stay away from colors. It's going to make exploring hands and drawing hands a lot easier. And as I said, my classes aren't really a how-to, as much as they are a lecture on the discipline of whatever the object is going to be. So I do how-tos on eyes, I do how-tos on form studies and faces and male and female and bodies and all of that, but I do like to focus on the how of the how, which is the real discipline behind the techniques and how to think like an artist primarily. So that just because you came to this only class, you can still apply the lessons you learned today in how to draw feet, or how to draw elbows or whatever, or how to draw the collarbone. It's the same thing. Finding the underlying geometry, and by use of large brush and staying away from color, you explore the mechanics of the anatomy and make something that looks realistic. Everyone wants that. So do not settle for high contrast values. They're schemers. Yes, they are reminiscent of the old gods, which are the gods of the lines. They're very evil. They don't promise success. Do not settle for high contrast values just because it's not reading yet. You're better than that. Don't settle for high contrast just because low contrast isn't reading yet. Excellent. Give your brush and give your high opacity a chance to work. Don't be that artist that always uses opacity on low. Are you that kind of artist? Be honest with me. It's GIF, confirmed by the creator of the file extension. Yeah, he wanted to say GIF instead of GIF, but if you look up what GIF stands for, it stands for something. It's an abbreviation for a word, graphics interchange format. You don't say graphics, do you? You say graphics, so I'm going to say GIF. My polygons are clearly good at hiding from me. Well, she did make a huge deal of pronouncing mate. So be careful. I'll make a video about that again. I'm sorry, I had a really bad week that day, and that prick just came in and abused my emailing. It was just annoying. I'm afraid I am. Uh-oh, XRen. I never touch opacity or flow. It just adds complexity for me right now. That's good, Rayon. I'm proud of you. You can use a little bit, but for now, try to stay high opacity, guys, because that's what's going to get you that clean edge. That's what's going to keep you thinking about form studies. And I think that you guys will really benefit from form studies if you guys take private tutoring. With me, I always assign form studies. They are a staple homework that comes with everything. And what they are constantly telling the artist to do is to constantly think about the form, the real relationship between light and form, and how we can bring in that third dimension back into this limited two-dimensional world. You are creating a false projection of three dimensions. So that's hard, and it's not easy, and you're not going to get it right away because you're fighting your brain. You are actually fighting what your brain is programmed to do, which is get a bunch of symbols for you. You're actually fighting your brain. It's a really difficult thing to fight yourself and fight your habits and your limitations as a mortal creature. Form studies are an amazing way to tackle that disability, that inherent disability in all of us. It's a great way to keep your mind thinking about rotation so you can actually start enhancing your imagination better because you're imagining forms on a greater scale. And you can rotate that cube in your head and you see how the shades change. It's a great way to learn some brush efficiency, and I really recommend all of you guys to give me some form studies. I will critique them all if you guys give them to me. Every one of you will get a form study critique. Do watch the form study videos. They are actually going to help you deal with hands a little bit better. So last week was all about sort of the underlying underwiring, the gesture line, the shapes, all of that stuff, capturing the anatomy, making sure you have a good reference. This one is what you do after you get the underwiring. Today's class was about what to do when you're rendering. When you render, everyone repeat after me. Make sure you know. Make sure you're not blending where you're not supposed to be blending. You're not blending where you're not supposed to be blending, yeah. And make sure you are blending well when you are dealing with large stretches of fat or muscle. But with the fingers are the hardest thing about a hand. It's not the palm, it's not the wrist, it's the fingers. The fingers are all form study. The fingers are all polygons. The fingers are all not blending. And it's really difficult to remember that. So everyone write that back at me. When you are trying to render a hand, remember there are areas where you're not supposed to be blending, and that's in between the fingers. And you're not supposed to be using lines. Do not use lines for the fingers. It will not give you a read. It's fake read. It's artificial. It's like in Harry Potter. You know that stone that brings people back from the dead, but they're not really back. It's like a ghost of them, and they're really sad because they're not alive or dead. They're like in this horrible, terrible limbo. That's what lines are. That's what lines are, guys. I'm in like in a Harry Potter mood because we always watch Harry Potter around the fall and winter. Let me see what everyone's saying. Make sure you're not blending where you're not supposed to be blending. Fingers suck. Don't blend where you're not supposed to blend. Because Ista is always watching. When rendering, make sure that you are blending when you need to, only. And there are very, very rare times when it comes to hands. Never blend between the fingers. Never use lines to replace the edges. Remember, the edges are not the lines and vice versa. Fuck lines. Stop relying on lines. Make sure you know when to blend. Blend large stretches of fat, but do not blend where the bones are closer to the surface. Fingers have strong edges. Excellent enthusiasm. That's beautiful. Let me repeat that. Blend large stretches of fat, but do not blend where the bones are closer to the surface. Fingers have stronger edges. These areas that are jutting out from beneath the skin are creating really harsh edges that should not be blended if the light is behaving with them in that way. Not the Philosopher's Stone. No, it's one of the hollows. It's one of the the hollows, or the Sleepy Hollow. No, it's not Sleepy Hollow. What am I saying? It's I don't know, the hollows. I don't know. Spoilers. All I remember lines are limbo. Harry Potter spoiler alert. Lines are the Philosopher's Stone? No. You should start a t-shirt line. Fuck lines. Think of the cube. Keep your fingers out of the blender. Horcruxes. No, not Horcruxes. The Deathly Hollows. Yeah. You guys haven't watched that part of Harry Potter yet? Anyways, today was a really, really extensive class about rendering hands. I know I don't, and I'm just going to acknowledge this now, I know I don't do a lot of work in front of you guys. I know I don't paint in front of you guys. There's just so much dialogue to be had, and so many questions to ask, and so many paintings to go through. I feel like if I painted, like demonstrating how I draw hands, it'll take too much time off the critique hours, which I dedicate to you guys. That's why I don't do much demonstration on air. When I do demonstration, it's when I'm making an exclusive YouTube video or a Patreon video. That's when I do demonstrations, meaning I'll draw in front of you and talk about what I'm doing. So I did that with the face, I do that with eyes, with real core lessons where you guys are not involved. But since these are critiques and I'm challenging you guys' work directly, that's why I don't demonstrate as much as I should, because of the critique hour, the fact that it's your hour and it's for you guys. If there's like a vote where you guys want me to draw something in front of you and just talk about how I do it and ask me like questions about my process and what I think about, it would have to be just that. It would have to be demonstration, not much lesson, because both is just going to take way too long and I'm probably going to lose my voice. So if you guys have any questions on what you want me to demonstrate. So if you guys want me to demonstrate anything specifically, if you want a demonstration week instead of lessons or critiques, we can have that theme as well. For next week, I want it's not a theme so much as that, there's that, and then there's something else. For next week, it's not so much a theme, but it is a request from me to you guys. I want to see some form study homework. I'm looking through the community, and I just see lots and lots of attempts at forms as a specific form. So let me just get to the community. So what I'm seeing is a real problem. Like I said, it's an epidemic of misuse of dark grays and light grays. Real misuse and excessive use of blacks and high contrast. And there's a minor anatomy issues, but you guys don't know what to do with black. And you guys don't know what to do with grays, and you guys don't know what to do with the highlights that sit in between. And this is mostly because of the fact that you guys don't sculpt. You guys aren't sculptors. You guys don't get clay, and most of you at least don't get clay and actually just sculpt something and then redraw it after you sculpted it. Do you know how powerful it is to actually grab some clay and just sculpt with your hands? You get a real intimate, tangible experience with the form that you remember later when you draw by hand. So what I'm trying to say is I want to start promoting, like I'm on a campaign right now trying to promote the use of form studies in your studies. You can go ahead and buy some Sculpey or Sculpty or whatever it's called and sculpt some form studies and then redraw them. You can just sculpt them and take pictures and show us. You can sculpt a face, but I am officially declaring war on this misuse of blacks and whites. These are so beautiful. The sketch is just gorgeous. I wanted to take a look at it, but the hand became in. This right here, so much black used for no reason. All the form is just lost. And you're using like excessive silhouette for a quick read. This is not good studying. So nice progress. So yes, I want to see some form studies. If you guys don't know what form studies are, let me send you, what the fuck is this? Proof Serena and Venus Williams are men. Satanic Illuminati gay agenda exposed. Illuminati celebrity Satanism. What have I been searching for? I think I just searched for one thing about the recent Paris attacks. Now I'm getting all this in my feed. Anyways, that was weird. Let's see what we got here. Every one of these talks about form, but let's see the ones where I specifically talk about form study. Form study process. So this is like my recording, me recording myself drawing the forms. So this is how I do it. This is my process. It's like more of a demonstration. So there we go. There's that. And then there is some more. Form study critique. This is me critiquing someone's form study. So that might be helpful. I'm going to hear my voice in a sec. I hope I don't. So this person tried form studies and I'm critiquing their form study, talking to them about overuse of grays, etc. And I think that's it for the really helpful ones. There's a lot more demonstration. This is a colored form study. This is not really helpful. It's supposed to be in gray. This one is a more organic form study. It's not really, yeah, it's more organic. It's less geometric, the Illuminati eye. So yes, please do some more form studies. I request from you, I humbly request, for your own health and benefit and future success as young, beautiful, growing, bright-eyed, beautiful little artists here, sitting here today for their own future and their own benefit and educate. I'm very proud of you guys. You know, you could be off playing fucking Fallout 4 or something, but you're here trying to learn. I'm very proud of you guys. But I'm telling you, this will help you improve. Do some form studies. My life changed as soon as I started doing some form studies. That difference in the way I used to draw hands, that massive difference, came from a different appreciation of my use of grays and the edges, which you learn when you do form studies. Thanks everyone for coming. Have a great evening. Bye bye.